Michael, you're sort of stuck in the middle of this. You're quiet.
Yeah. They're going to war. It's great. It's no, just when you keep coming back and forth and you're talking about national interest and value, just to take it back away from fuels and going back to just subsidies and different forms of support. This week we had the announcement of the first offshore competitive wind lease off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and for a long time people have been asking, what's the economics of this? What are we looking at here? And for those leases, which they're in areas that are not included in the current 5-year plan for oil and gas development, of course not of Massachusetts, but for each lease, I think they're getting about $1 or $2 per acre. Now, if Department of Interior sees a lease sale for oil and gas that's going down below, say, $100 or even $200 in the proper areas, they won't conduct the sale because they don't think that the U.S. taxpayer is getting fair value for their resources. So when we're looking at policies that are allowing for lease sales for wind for $1 or $2 per acre versus oil and gas, which is a couple $100 per acre,
it's much more than that.
I mean, it's
much
huge.
more than that, and here's why: because of the wind production tax credit, which has been extended for another year, and we hope it winds down after this year, but we don't expect that to happen. It's going to cost well over $200 million in direct credits for the production of wind if that project ever goes online, because all they have to do between now and a certain period of time is be under construction for that project. So if they can meet that U.S. Treasury criteria, then they qualify for the production tax credit. So the taxpayers are forking over their money to give to the wind industry simply to produce wind. And I don't know that there's an equivalent there in the oil and gas industry. So,
right. But what I was getting at is just the value for our resources. We don't get it off of those kind of activities, and those are government activities that are moving forward. I think, again, going back to when we're looking at subsidies, we have to look at what we're getting versus what we're spending. And clearly, we're not getting fair value for what we're spending in that area.
One problem, I think, with the wind and solar industry is that industry looked like it could be competitive 5 years ago, but nobody saw. That was when natural gas was $12 to $15, and the economics just don't work when natural gas is $3, $4. It just doesn't work. And so I just don't see, except for really niche markets for wind and solar, I just don't see it scalable to be able to provide in any kind of economical fashion the kind of power we need to energize a $16 trillion economy. It's just not going to happen. And unless you see a big increase in natural gas. I mean, I think the big issue for our energy industry right now is really the competition you're going to see between oil and gas. I think you're going to see a lot of transportation vehicles, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, guys, but my prediction is over the next 10 years, you're going to see a lot of vehicles that run on natural gas as a competition for oil. And if that happens, actually, it could drive down the price of oil as these two fuel sources compete. That's just my kind of suspicion of where the energy market is going.
That'll be a market decision versus
right.
Although we're already talking about the RFS is up for debate this Congress, right? Mm-hmm. We're already hearing that Republican congressmen from Texas, for example, are introducing legislation to allow natural gas to be converted to ethanol to be included as part of the RFS. Huh. So, and then you have the Boone-Pickens plan, right? I mean, let's let the market, it's already happening in those large fleets, right? Those return to the barn, the UPSs and the, entities that can charge these overnight or fill them overnight. Let's let that conversion take place naturally as opposed to, rushing down to this building here and trying to get, their carve out in the RFS, because that'll displace some of your corn in that RFS as well.
I was just in Pennsylvania I had to drive to New York, and for the first time in my life, actually, I pulled up at a service station, and they actually were dispensing not just gasoline, but natural gas, and I think that'll flourish, and hopefully without subsidy.
One of the arguments that is often presented in favor of why the government needs to be involved in this heavily is, or has been, climate change, or so-called climate change, however you look at it, and nobody has really mentioned that at all today, which I find fascinating. Is there a reason for that?
I certainly thought that I had, but that's...
Well, you mentioned externalities in general, but it was interesting that that wasn't presented as a strong argument. No one has made that as a strong argument. Is that because it has become less of a useful currency in these debates? Is that what?
Well, there's no question that the debate over carbon has waned over the past couple of years for a whole host of reasons. But I don't think that it is off the horizon completely. I mean, I think people still are looking to reduce our carbon footprint and have recognized the consequences of carbon emissions. I mean, you can debate specific weather events, but clearly the volatility in weather of late, most scientists are going to say, is going to be related to increased carbon emissions. So at some point, I believe that Congress will return to looking at that issue in a meaningful way. And when they do, I think you have to contemplate what that means for a tax structure that is still favoring fossil fuels over renewable fuels.
Well, while Congress is thinking about it and potentially may go back to the issue, the marketplace is reducing emissions. Natural gas displacing coal, in part because of regulation, unfortunately. But emissions are down in this country, and no longer is the United States the largest emitter of CO2, whether you believe that's a value or not. And so, again, I think it goes back to, natural gas is sort of taking that role without some 2,000-page bill from a guy from Massachusetts and a gal from California to tell us how we're going to, how we're going to fix this problem. So
yeah, look, I think on climate change and carbon emissions, the most important thing we can do if we want to reduce our carbon emissions is go gangbusters on natural gas. Natural gas is a very low carbon emitting fuel. It's clean and it's abundant and it's cheap. And Tom is right. The country, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe the industrialized country over the last 4 years that has reduced its carbon emissions the most has been the United States, in large part because we're using so much natural gas. It's interesting to me that environmentalists have sort of turned against natural gas as it's become cheaper, even though it is doing a lot to reduce global warming.
And I suppose a follow-up to that is, during the presidential debates, both Mitt Romney and Barack Obama tried to outdo each other on how much coal they thought they could burn. Well, I mean, at selling this as a free marketeer in a time with a huge debt and a structural budget deficit, with the amount of money that is being spent on it, I mean, presumably that's easy. Is that easy?
Is what easy?
Is it easy to sell? I mean, is the right winning this? Because,
well,
sorry, I mean, in that we still have all of these laws on the books.
There's no doubt in all the research that I've done and sort of the public opinion side of things that there's a lot of support for renewables across the spectrum. But if you dig a little deeper and you explain to them that what they're getting for their buck and how much money that they're shelling out in the form of these subsidies, and again going back to that on a BTU basis. The support is wide, but it's not quite as deep. I mean, if you can honestly say that these energy sources are not dependent on the federal government, I think that they would be much more inclined to support them as alternatives to these other sources. But when you tell them that they're dependent for whatever reason, they wonder, well, dependency isn't a good thing at all. So what does that mean for the products themselves going forward? So we're not necessarily killing it in terms of the public debate, but I think there's a whole lot of need for a little bit more understanding about this very debate that we're having. But also, when you start giving them numbers, then they start to scratch their heads.